Oh, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hope that you're well. We've got ourselves a beautiful day outside, so no reason to be dismayed or downtrodden. And especially as we're considering the information from our Matthew study and what Jesus has been involved in teaching to his apostles, and what we learn. We're not in Matthew 26, but just to give us a picture as to what's transpired from 23 to 24, and now as we come to the conclusion of chapter 25, 26 will tell us that as he concluded, and it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said unto his disciples, which tells us that all of this information is following one after the other. This is one long section of teaching that Jesus has been involved in with these apostles, and we know specifically there's Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And when we are considering what is coming ahead and what is just around the corner for Jesus, should become more apparent as to why this information is so important. That as they are fixing to go through some dark days, and specifically Jesus with his trial, the crucifixion, and everything like that, that he is presenting to them the reality that there's something that is beyond this. That unable to get to the sun that's on the other side, you've got to go through some darkness. And that is what's going to be coming for all of them, and that there's going to be a reckoning, there's going to be an accounting, there's going to be a standing before God in judgment. That there is no reason to fear that. That even though there is going to come a separation between these two classes of people, you can go into this situation with full confidence of where it is that you're going to be. And that's the reason why he's giving this illustration. So for individuals that will face death, for example, and have fear and trembling that will come over them, there's no reason to face death that way. Number one, to recognize that death is just simply a transition. It's not annihilation. It's not destruction. Things do not stop. That's just a beginning of something else. And the reality that, okay, we're going to live somewhere else, either in one category or the other, and that Jesus has already given us the instructions on where we can be. It's like coming up to test day. And then the teacher says, as you're sitting there in class, okay, it's open notes. And it's just like, man, that's the best kind of test that you could ever have. All of the notes are in here and in everything that we've been studying. So this section begins, verse 31. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations. He shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. So this is speaking about, as we've mentioned, 24, 36, and the illustrations that are given after that are a shift in direction, a shift in focus. We're no longer focusing in on the destruction, the punishment, the annihilation that's coming on the Jewish people. That now things have been focused on, here's what's going to happen to the righteous and the unrighteous in the church. There's a different judgment that's being pictured there. Yes, the Jews are going to receive theirs, but do not start deceiving yourself into thinking that the Jews are the only ones that are going to be punished. Even those inside of God's household, those that are inside of the wedding party, and those of his servants that do not behave appropriately, they will face punishment. But those that do behave themselves appropriately, wisely, and righteously, they shall receive a reward. So, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. When we are reading these terms, especially when it references the fact of him coming in his glory, or even him receiving of his glory, these are phrases that are used in several different contexts. For example, when you read through John's account, John 14, 15, and 16, and 17 for that matter, when Jesus is praying, in leading up to his crucifixion, he prays to the Father that his Father will glorify him in that moment. So when was it that Jesus is being glorified? At his death. In the resurrection that Jesus goes through is also described as a glorifying that took place. And as we read in Matthew chapter 24, him coming in judgment is also a phrase or a passage where we find this phrase and terminology being used of him coming in his glory. So when we're looking at this phrase, I'm using that as illustration just to say this is not talking about just one specific point. Anytime that God, or Jesus for that matter, is designated as showing forth his power, his authority, his kingship, you have this phrase being used. You can even see it throughout the Old Testament as well. But we're just simply pointing this out for the sake of clarifying that, so like I said, we have one section of our brotherhood, they want to look at this and say, okay, all of this is AD 70. No. This is in fact talking about something else.
Can you restate what you just said in the Old Testament part? Was that God is referred to in his glory? Is that what you said?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
In passages like this, so here it is, a coming in judgment or a coming in punishment. When God is coming on judgment on Israel or coming in judgment on Egypt or Babylon, any of those other kingdoms, this phraseology is used, that he's coming in his glory. And that's just his power and his magnificence is what this phrase is describing. But as we've mentioned in our previous classes, sometimes our brain has the tendency of, well, when we see certain terms or certain phrases, we just automatically assume that this is talking about that. So like, for example, the idea, the word of salvation. When we see that term or we see that word salvation, what does our brain automatically switch into? What do we think of?
Heaven.
All right, heaven or baptism, which is for what purpose?
To inherit.
Saved.
Okay, to be saved, but in what way?
To be a part of his kingdom.
Too many people at one time. What'd you say?
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I said to become a part of his kingdom.
Okay.
Spiritually.
Okay, spiritually. That we're washing away sins. But there are certain contexts where that word salvation is used to describe physical salvation, such as in Matthew 23, where it said that no, except those days be prolonged or set to the side, there be no flesh that be saved. So context is going to establish these terms, but as I mentioned, just a lot of times we see this in his glory. It's like, oh, automatically we go to final return, final day, the end of all things. Well, that is in this context, but just every time we see that, it's not the case. So he's coming in his glory, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. Now, again, with individuals that have a wrong interpretation of this, they're saying that they're in fact putting these two situations together. Well, when he comes at this point, then is he sitting upon the throne of his glory? But is that actually what's being described? Or is it not the case that we have this being connected together and him sitting on the throne of his glory is for a perfect or a specific reason? So now we're thinking like pre-mill, still with some of the 80s, 70s stuff, but primarily with premillennialism. He'll come in his glory, and then he'll sit on his throne. He'll establish his kingdom. But is that what's being presented here? Now, Jamie, you were going to mention something before I even asked that question.
That's okay, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm going to let you
Okay.
continue.
So people would look at this and like, okay, we're seeing things play out in time. That when this happens is then when this is going to happen. But are there not already passages, are there passages that already establish that no, he's already sitting on his throne?
Okay. When he ascends into heaven, he's on the right hand of God.
Okay?
And he has authority over the earth.
Right.
We know that. In future text, it tells us that. So when he comes in his glory, is that when he finally comes down for the final judgment? Is that where you're trying to say? Is it two different things that you're getting at right there?
Possibly. Elaborate a little bit more if you can. Or was that it?
That was it.
Okay. So what I'm trying to do, I'm wanting us to establish what this text is actually teaching, while at the same time having in our brains what other people are trying to say about it. The pre-mill will look at this and say, okay, he's coming, and he's coming in his glory, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory.
When he makes his physical kingdom
Right.
here on earth.
Right. When he establishes it here on earth, so even with them, this is not the end of all things. This is either pre-tribulation or post-tribulation or post after the tribulation that he's doing all of these things. And that this is when all of that's transpiring. But when we read in Acts chapter 2, verses 30 and 31, Peter in his sermon already states, based upon Old Testament prophecy, that Jesus, in being raised, and that according to the promise that was made to David, he was raised for what purpose? To sit upon his throne. So when we are thinking, or when we're reading this is not a picture of traveling through time of the processes of what's going to happen. But all of this is in connection with what's happening here. He's coming in his glory. He's sitting on his throne of glory for what purpose? Judgment. And it's not a picture that, okay, he's not been sitting this whole entire time. Because Acts chapter 2, Peter says he is. And even at the death of Stephen, and Stephen looked into heaven, or he had a vision, a glimpse into heaven as he was being killed, being murdered, and what did he see?
Jesus sitting at the right hand of God.
Well, he actually standing. Okay, all right. So even with that, people will say, well, okay, you see there, he's not sitting, he's actually standing. But when you go over to the Hebrew letter, what do we continuously have being presented in that letter? He's being shown, or not even signified, he's being shown as sitting at the right hand of God. This is just simply a stating of fact, a connection of coming in his glory, his divinity, his authority, sitting on the throne, and thus he's going to judge.
You're saying when people want to read this, they want to say, okay, he comes in his glory, salvation, heaven, it's the end. That's where our brains want to go is, for us, it'd be, okay, that's him in his glory, we're all getting taken up to heaven. And then the premillennialists, they want to say that it's in the future or it's whenever he sets it back up in Jerusalem. But you're saying it's in this context where, okay, when Jesus dies, he's resurrected, then he's sitting in glory at the right hand of God, judging, and that's where this conversation comes in.
Okay, I'm overcomplicating it. No, it's good. It's me.
It's not you, it's me.
Okay, this is the final. All right.
Period.
Right.
Tab,
Okay.
tab, tab, tab,
Okay.
tab, tab.
Now, what I was saying about this or this phrasing here was just simply a point of application that, okay, even though this is the final, and we see these terms about him coming in his glory, and then this is going to transpire with judgment, this is not what fits into every context. It is here. But as you start going back and you start seeing these terms that are used in other forms of teaching in other contexts, you got to let that context establish what's actually being talked about. Matthew 24 references him coming in his glory, but that was in judgment on Jerusalem. Now we have the same terminology, and it's coming in judgment, but it's not the same. Now it's on the church. Okay, was that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Well, do we have kind of a reference there with the holy angels with him, with what it's talked about in 1 Thessalonians 5?
Mm-hmm.
Is
It'd
that
actually be
right?
4. 4, yeah.
Yeah. Where it's,
And how that he shall come with the sound, or with the voice of the archangel with a great shout, and the calling forth of those that are dead, preceding those which are alive to meet him up in the air. Yeah. And so even in that situation is a picture of that separation that's taking place. Here are the sheep, dead and alive, being called up, and even fits into Matthew chapter 24 of the one or the two that'll be grinding at the millstone, and one will be taken and one will be left. There's this separation that's being taken place, and there's a rewarding, there's a dispensing that's going to transpire from that. So yeah, there's a lot of connection, a lot of similarity that's being tied into all those different images that would go together. So as we said, this is focused on the church, discussing the same wise and foolish individuals that we've been dealing with since the end of Matthew 24. Those in the household, you have good servants, evil servants, you have the wise virgins, the foolish virgins, you have the 10-talent man, 5-talent man, the 1-talent man, and the rewards that are being given. So it's just the same people are being discussed, just in 3 different illustrations and 3 different formats. Now that helps when you get over and you're involved in studying and trying to understand the revelation. That as John is receiving those visions and that imagery, and you have it being described in those different ways, it's still all describing the same thing, just in different formats. But our religious friends want to look at that and say, well, no, we've got different things that are actually happening, that this is not all the same. No, we can find how Jesus is involved in his teaching and his illustrations. He's going to put this in a format to where everybody's going to be able to understand it, one way or the other. Maybe you don't understand farming, but you understand sheep. So we're going to put it in those terms. Maybe you don't understand farming, you don't understand sheep, so we'll put it in the format of the talents. But you're going to get it. You're going to understand it. So here we have the same people being judged, and that is judging all nations. Now granted, as we are considering verse 32 and how that it says that he gathered, before him shall be gathered all nations. Some might argue, well, okay, but it's a gathering up of all nations, but you have the gathering of all nations in the church. And that if there's a gathering of all nations in the church, and according to prophecy, Isaiah chapter 2, Micah chapter 4, then how would this, if it's a gathering into the church of all nations, how does this fit into a global all nations type of judgment that we would try to present? Because that's what this is. This is not just a local Jerusalem judgment. This is global by the fact of the gathering of all nations.
Can you give a
So for individuals that we might deal with that would say, no, 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 this is still looking at Jerusalem or some physical location, or even for that matter, we have some in our brotherhood that they look at this as even possibly being Rome and a final, like the destruction of Rome, and that's okay. Like we would say, no, 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 this is global based upon gathering of all nations. But somebody could argue, well, you have all nations being gathered in the church. So this doesn't have to be a global. It could just be, in fact, referencing to the church. But what's the problem with that?
The gospel went out everywhere.
Okay. Is the church just, do you just have Christians gathered together in just one central location?
No.
No. The gospel of the kingdom, Matthew chapter 4, is to go out into all the world. So as this is a speaking to and a speaking of, okay, yeah, we're referencing the church, and we're looking on the inside, but we're still looking at the fact that you're not just looking at the church specifically itself, but here you have all nations being gathered at the same time with these individuals. And that even with that, there's a separation that's taking place. So what this helps us to realize is that when it comes to the law of God, who all is responsible to follow that?
Everybody.
It's everybody. Everyone is amenable to and responsible to what Jesus is teaching. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to judge the world. We have our set of laws in this country. We cannot hold people in England accountable to our laws. They don't live here. They're not citizens here. They're not amenable to those laws. But the fact that you have this transpiring and taking place, and it's dealing with all nations, that teaches that every single person, whether they recognize it or not, is going to have to answer to God's law. And if that's not the case, then God has no right to judge them. He would not be just in doing that.
So then are we allowed to follow suit? God can judge, then we can judge.
Yes.
So that goes against that letter that occurred. That letter that we did in evangelism class.
The letter?
It was an article.
Oh, right, by Wes McAdams.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says we can't based on.
Yeah.
But that would, if God is judging the world, God wouldn't be able to judge the world if He's not holding everyone accountable. But everyone needs to know, and everyone will know in the end.
Yeah. So Jordan's referencing the Wes McAdams article that we went through in our evangelism class where he tried to use 1 Corinthians chapter 5 that we cannot hold the world to the church's standards of sexual purity. Now, even with that type of terminology, is it the church's standards? Is it just simply our standards that we decided as the church, well, here's what we're going to do? No, it's God's standards. So right there, you've got a problem. That He's not recognizing that as being a God-set rule. And then also forgetting the fact that in the very next chapter, in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul says, when questioning them as to why they're not judging matters inside of the church, and these small matters at that, in referencing the fact, are you not aware that we're going to judge angels and that we in fact do judge the world? Now, we can't punish them. We cannot give discipline the same way we would with brethren. But we can still teach against and condemn what they're doing. A couple that's out here living in adultery, I need to teach them. Hey, what you're doing is not right by God's standard and what He says about marriage. Because this judgment is coming to where you're going to have to give a response. Or actually, there is some responses being given here as we look through this. All right. Then he moves on in stating to these individuals, he starts with the righteous first. He shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Now, as we've mentioned in our studies, we are never moving away from the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. So what phrase should be jumping out at us? Blessed. Blessed of, and notice that, of my Father. Here we are, right back in the Beatitudes. These characteristics and these attitudes are supposed to be following us all the way through, that are the motivating factors for everything that we are striving to do. And that is just, it's not a simple fact that we're just simply blessed within ourselves, but we are blessed of the Father. He's the one that blesses. It's not just some inherent or intrinsical thing that just ends up happening by the things that we're doing. There is a connection between you're wanting to be blessed, here's what you do. And you don't get to say of yourself, well, yeah, I'm just a blessed person. I'm just good on my own. No, this is being poured out and being given. And it's going to be clarified upon what basis here in just a moment. Then we also have this statement here, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. We have already seen this type of terminology also with the parable of the talents. With both of the servants that went out and brought more back in, what was said to both of them?
Go into thy rest.
All right, you're close. Matthew 25:21, his Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. So here we have being presented in both of these, entering in. Enter into the joy, inherit the kingdom. And this kingdom that has been prepared for you from the foundation of the world. When we're referencing the foundation of the world here, what's that word? World.
Catholic.
No.
Universal.
No.
Nations.
Mm,
All nations.
No. Now, the only reason why I'm bringing it up is because in the beginning of Matthew chapter 24, when the apostles are asking about when shall be the end of the world, what's that word? Now, our English just simply translates it world, but in the Greek, age, eon. All right? But what's this? Do you think it's age, or do you think it's something else?
It's eternal. It's since the very beginning.
It's important to distinguish between these words because this is actually cosmos.
That's what I meant.
Okay, good job. Cosmos, which is the thought I had it here in my notes. You got to have it there in the Bible program? Give us that definition.
Hold on. Probably from the base of 2865, orderly arrangement, decoration by implication of the world in a wide or narrow sense, including its inhabitants, literally or figuratively adorning the world.
Okay, so it's the decorating or the arrangement, the adorning arrangement that has transpired. So when we are referencing that this has been prepared for you from the foundation of the world, we're going beyond the law of Moses. We're going beyond the time of the patriarchs. And for that matter, we're even going beyond Adam and Eve. That what is being pictured here is what God has had in mind before any of that was even set into place. That in creating this world and that putting man in it, He knew there's going to be problems. And that the fact that there would be problems, He began in arranging a plan so as to fix the problems, so as to redeem, and to bring everybody back to where He wanted them, in fellowship.
I just want to make a comment. It just, when you focus in on it and think about it, what brings to my mind is how small you are against everything of God.
Yeah.
You're just
To where, yeah, like with, well, he was Abram at the time, but in Genesis 15, and that God is establishing the covenant with him, and Abram just says, I'm ash. And it's the psalmist that says, who is man that God is mindful of him? And then, so let's, and I think you mentioned it, to not only look at this from the standpoint of, all right, yeah, God loved the whole world that He gave His only begotten Son. And you think about how big the world is and how many people are actually in it at this point. But then you bring it into a small, like you condense that down and condense it down and you condense it down to the level that Paul does. And how that Paul references the fact that Christ was crucified for me. And you bring it down into that personal level. And that all of this, yeah, was done for the world, but it was also done for me specifically. And that's care. And that's concern. To where we don't have to be like that one-talent man to just picture God as being hard and austere. No. That's not the picture that we have here. So from before the time of Adam and Eve, this is what God's been working out. To bring His creation back into fellowship with Him. And that it's based upon some conditions. Here is why they are entering in. For I was an hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. So Jesus gives the why. Why are these called blessed? And why do they get to enter in to the inheritance? It's because of what you did. So when people say that faith is pleasing to God, this is what that means. We want a biblical picture of what faith in God is. This is it. You believe in me, you'll do what I say. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. All throughout His teaching, He's giving the information, the presentation. Here is what discipleship looks like. It's not just simply sitting at home and saying, yeah, I believe in Jesus. That's not discipleship. That's not Christianity. This is Christianity. If you want to hear blessed, it's more than just being able to stand before God and say, oh yeah, I believe who you are. And that's going to be illustrated by the goats when we get there in just a moment. Now, when we're thinking about what's being presented here in verse 35, are these the only things that are required so as to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant, blessed ye of my Father, and enter into the kingdom? No, these are not the only things. This is just simply a short, comprehensive list. It's a summation of all that he's been teaching in the short little bit of the 3 years that he's been involved in teaching. Which that's a good point to bring up. Do we recognize that what we have being presented here is not the full 3 years of what Jesus taught and did? From Matthew 24 into Matthew 25 and into 26 is just happening within one day. And what we've had from Matthew 5 up to this point, I read it, but I didn't put it in my notes. But it's really just a matter of months of the time frame that we actually have recorded. So all this is snapshots to represent something bigger. To where, as he's pointing out, we'll give them meat, give them drink, took them in, clothed them, visited them in prison, so on and so forth, helping the sick. Yeah, these are important. We need to do these things, but this is not the only thing. Now, the only reason why I bring that up is because that's what the denominational world tries to do. They'll try to go to this and say, well, here's what you need to do. But we've already dealt with that mentality in our study. The rich young ruler came asking what?
What's the one thing?
What good thing can I do to inherit? It's not a matter of one thing. It's a matter of striving to do as much as we can, not as little. So what's being pictured here is that we can look at this and see, well, here's some of the basics, if you will. Just kind of common sense of what's needing to be done. But it's a short list to represent all that he's already been involved in teaching and doing. But to hear blessed of my Father enter into the inheritance is contingent upon and based upon, have you been doing this? And that is key when we're thinking about what's going on around us. How that we have huge assemblies that will be assembled today in which they're going to be teaching salvation is not by works. Well, then how do you make this fit? How do you make what Jesus is presenting here fit into this form of theology? It doesn't. And then you'll have the other side that will try to say, well, salvation always produces works, but then works never produce salvation. But even that doesn't fit into Matthew 25. The final inheritance, that salvation, that eternal salvation, is being contingent upon what you're going to be able to stand before God to give a reckoning of. Now, if what they're saying is true here, okay, I have salvation first, then can I ignore these works? I'm already saved. Can I just set the works to the side and still go to heaven? Well, they'll all agree, well, no, you can't do that. Oh, so I need these works for salvation. It doesn't matter if you put the works ahead or the works behind. You still make them a prerequisite. You still make them an essential part. And there's nothing wrong with that, as we're going to see in just a moment. So this is a catchy phrase, but there's not 1 ounce of truth in it. Jesus said of the evil man in Matthew chapter 7, if you, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children. There are evil men that know how to do good. We saw it with the Pharisees. They know how to give alms. They know how to pray. They're going through the processes of the sacrifices. So if good works are being produced, then that must mean that they're saved. Well, no. And there comes in the misunderstanding of our religious friends. That we're not looking at the works as being the final definition and the final say-so of who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. Because you have evil men that do good things and they're still going to be lost. And that's because their motivation is wrong. The Pharisees did those good things that God requires for what purpose?
Themselves.
For themselves, to be seen of men. But what we're going to be shown by the righteous, here's their motivation and here's their attitude. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee and hungered and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick or in prison and came unto thee? So this section proves the point about this. It is true that I am doing these things because I am saved. I'm a Christian. I have responsibility to do these things. But that does not remove the effect that these things have on my salvation. It's not the works that gain me entrance. It's the one judging who says, you get to enter. Because like we just said, I can do these works and still hear, you're not coming in. Don't get ahead of me. And that's pictured here. Look at the response that they give. When did we do this? We have described the mindset of the ones that are involved in these actions. They ask, when did we do this for you? These actions never crossed their mind to be meritorious. That, oh, we're just keeping a tally of what we're doing. If they had pictured these works this way, and they're going to boast and they're going to brag in it, then when Jesus said to them, well, you did this for me. Oh yeah, I remember doing that. Yeah, I've got that written down right here, logged away. But that's not going on. These are just simply works of faith. This is just simply labor of love. This is a servant mindset. A servant, and more specifically, correctly translated, a slave, does not get up in the morning and go out and do the work of the master expecting any type of reward. This is just what I'm supposed to do. But if the master is just, then what will the master do? He will reward his servants. So even as we're considering that point and we're looking at, so even like with what I just described there is actually Old Testament law. That if you have servants, whether they're strangers or of your own brethren, you do not withhold their payment. You do not withhold what is owed to them. And the law of Moses, in being given, is giving to the Old Testament saints, that nation of Israel, that people, a picture of who God is. Why is it that God is commanding His people, hey, when you have somebody that comes and works for you, you don't withhold payment? Because that's how God is. And that as you have a servant and someone who is laboring for you, you give them what's owed. And that's a picture of God. But the picture goes further with the parable of Jesus and calling forth of the laborers. Jesus goes out and calls the ones that don't even deserve. They're just sitting around, not really taking any type of initiative, but He calls them too. And He pays them the same. Simply because it's the Master's goodwill. This is an illustration of that loving ministering that's supposed to take place that we read about in Matthew 24:41. Why do we do that? Because it's the right thing to do. And the king answered, or the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me. This is the heart and foundation of Christianity. When we view Christianity this way, it should make us question on how have we missed this? Because for most of our brethren, Christianity is just what's happening here. Okay, we're here on Sunday, we're gathered as Christians, and that's what Christianity is. That's our duty, that's our responsibility. That's true. But we're not going to be judged, held accountable for what we're just doing on this one day.
It's like the denominational world just putting the only there.
Yeah.
It's come to church only. That's all you have to do, and then throughout the week you go off and live as you would. When it's nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
Time flies by when you're having fun.
Yeah.
His commandments are not burdensome, so we're not even thinking about it. They're not burdensome, so we just do it.
Yeah.
That's the mindset.
You hear of somebody that's in this situation, you just act. So when I stand before God in judgment, will I have these kinds of things on my record? If not, I'm going to be judged on the goat side. So when we're thinking about these type of things, I mentioned to Jordan when we went out to take the basket to our friends that were in the car wreck. And I was mentioning to Jordan on the way on how it is, like it's the case that Jordan and I have helped them with some pretty hard stuff. Been out there in the heat of the summer, bucking bales. I helped them herd and haul off sheep to auction that went on late into the night, and it was very cold. But as we were going out to take that basket to them, in their time of need, time of pain, and time of loss because they lost their car, and it was their really only one that was reliable to get them from A to B. And I mentioned to Jordan that what we were doing right then, just in delivering that basket, will probably mean more to them than all that other stuff that we did. Because it's just, it would be one of those things that would just be very easy just to overlook and let slip through the cracks. Oh, you got this big thing you need us to do and come and help you with? Yeah, we'll come and help you with that. But then there's this little thing like just delivering a basket. It's like, hey, we're thinking about you through this. And that will mean more than all of the other things that we could possibly do for them. Now, why would I think like that? It's because I know this. And that is the little things that end up meaning the most. And that is even the little things that God notices. So again, as we're thinking about big things to do in the kingdom and little things to do in the kingdom, we don't need to gauge that way. We don't need to judge these things by that way. Just, hey, does this need to be done? Let me do it. And as I just mentioned, the fact that God, He takes notice of these things. Now, did we do that for the recognition? No, we didn't do it for the recognition. It was just the right thing to do. And it's just the thing that we need to do. But there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with me remembering and knowing that God's watching that too. That's why we're being given this information. Is so that we can fall back on and remember, yeah, God's watching this. My master is always in a position to where he sees, and I know that this is going to make him happy. This is going to please him. And that should make us even more happy to do it. And thus this very idea goes into what Paul would present about those servants and not doing your work just when the master is around. Or just when your master is in a position to see you. Because you have a master in heaven that sees all the time. And so when we're thinking about all of this, and then thinking about how we're seeing Jesus operate His life, how that Jesus came as the great physician to heal their hurt. And specifically those hurts that were brought by sin. And now when we read of Jesus and His miracles, we're not needing to just simply read them just as miracles. But that we're also putting that in the context of He's working this out of His compassion. And to realize that it's not just miracles for the sake of miracles, but He is healing people's hurts. And that since we are His children in His house, what are we supposed to be doing? The same thing. And that's the problem with the goats. Then shall he say unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. We have heard this phrase before, depart from me. Matthew 7, 20 through 22. Ye cursed, ye workers of iniquity, you lawless ones. And this is into everlasting fire. So there's everlasting reward, now there's everlasting fire. But then we also learn something about this everlasting punishment. Hell was not prepared for us. Everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. That's who that's made for. But if God is going to be just and without partiality, and that this is where these evil individuals are going for their rebellion against the ways of God, then what's the destination for those of us that are going to behave the same way? It's the same punishment. And so when we read this from, or we rather read from this, God does not choose anyone to go there. And that really God is not involved in sending anybody there. He just simply obliges what it is these individuals want to do. The ones going here have sealed their fate by what they chose. This is just consequence. Now, very quickly, who are the cursed? For I was hungered, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. And I was a stranger, and you took me not in. Naked, and you clothed me not. Sick and in prison, and you visited me not. Now, what do we learn from this? It is not just the things that we do that will condemn us. When we think about individuals being told, depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, well, that's going to be the ones that do commit fornication, those that do commit adultery, those that do curse or do smoke or do gamble or beat their children, beat their wives. We look at all those actions and it's like, okay, these are the things that you're doing that will cause you to be lost. But what's the difference about this list?
Well, I can't remember specifically, and I should know it, but in James, it references those who know to do good and don't do it.
Okay, James 4. Here we have being given to us by the Savior. It is the things that we did not do that we should have done that will condemn us just as much as the things that we did do. But as we said, are those things more important than what's listed here? No. To where when we're looking at this list and we're saying, okay, yeah, I'm doing these things. Okay, that's good. If you are strong in this area, hey, that's great. But what about the areas that you're weak in? Why not now try and go to work on that? And that's the game that we end up playing with ourselves. Is, well, I'm good in this, I'm good in this, and I'm good in this. You know, these others, I'm not so good. But hey, I've done this. that's a stagnation. That's reaching a level and reaching a limit inside of our minds that says, well, that's good enough. But that's not how Christianity works. We cannot be like the Pharisees that will tithe mint, anise, and cumin and then forget to do judgment, mercy, and faith. You've got to strive to have it all.
In your experience with people in the denominational world that believe that no works are involved, how do they get around these scriptures right here? Have you had an experience with that? Have you ever brought that up to them? Because it's depart because they haven't been doing the things and they claim that there's nothing to do.
Yeah.
So how would this fit? That would be a question I would like to ask them. How does this fit into your belief system?
Well, they really don't have an answer. And even in dealing with those individuals that are in that camp, and especially the Calvinists, who would say, well, you're just simply elect based upon God electing you, and then you ask them the why behind that, and it's, well, look at what they're doing. But I didn't think that mattered. So they end up running into themselves as you ask them the question. So they will usually have that kind of answer, but yeah, that answer doesn't help them. They recognize, yeah, there's something that's required, but then they want to jump through hoops but make it non-essential.
Well, I've also had somebody say to me one time that, well, why do I want to believe in a God that requires this of me, and if I don't do it, then it's going to condemn me? You know, that kind of a basic thought.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the same, it's the same type of thing if you think about it from a civil or social type of position. If we need to edit that out, we can edit that out. How is it that we get to live freely inside of our community? You follow the rules. It's based upon what you do. Now, we look at certain ones that live in our community that have certain restrictions put upon them, that being ankle bracelets. Okay, why are you facing that? Why do you not have the same type of freedoms that I do? I can go wherever I want to go. It's because you're not doing what you're supposed to. So to that question of, well, why would I want to be involved in something or part of something that ends up having me condemned if I don't do these things or if I do certain things? That's just the way of the world. We recognize if you're going to be a good person, here's what you do, and you get these liberties, you get these freedoms. But if you're going to be a criminal, you're going to be a cursed person, a lawless person, then okay, we've got to watch you. And we've got to keep tabs of you. We've got to track you to make sure you're not getting into any trouble. But even as we're thinking about that from the denominational standpoint, and that it gets into the area of no works, but it ultimately gets into the idea of once saved, always saved, this is a Church of Christ problem too. Oh, I've been baptized, I'm good. No. Oh, I've been baptized, I assemble on Sunday, I'm good. No. You're looking at it as the minimum of what your responsibility is. And that's not how a servant behaves. A servant goes above and beyond. That in every opportunity, this is there. So as we're looking at this, there's always something that somebody can be doing. So as we're thinking about it, from a brotherhood standpoint, and we're thinking on, well, I've assembled, I gave, I sang, I prayed, and hey, that's good. But are those things more important than what's listed here and what we should be doing elsewhere? No, you got to take them together. It's a package deal. Now, what about that list of things that you should do? I'm talking to us here. We're being taught from this, you better go do it. Well, I really should go and talk to this person. Then do it. Yeah, I really should go see this person, visit this person. Then you better go do it. Well, I did this thing that hurt this person. I really should go clear that up with them. Then you better do it. Well, I've not really been helping in the extra things that are going on with the church and the kingdom work and the things that we have going on. Then you need to get in that. You need to get on that. And that all of this goes back into leadership and influence. That all of us are in positions of leadership, all of us are in realms of influence, and that what brings this about is a lot of times brethren will be sitting around looking at other brethren and, well, they're not doing it. Why should I? And that's the bad kind of influence. When it needs to be the thing of, well, I'm not really worrying about what they're doing, I know what I need to do. And it could be the case that you actually going and doing that thing and going the extra mile is what gets them in gear. Oh, well, let me help you do that. Okay, fine. We'll do that together. So as we're thinking about James 1:27, that this is pure religion and undefiled before God, and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and that Jesus puts this in that list of what God is noticing and what is going to be involved in the separation. It is so easy for us to get wrapped up in our schedule. What I have going on, and then we forget about these folk. And as I was thinking about this, I'm thinking about different ones that we have within our realm of influence. And specifically, the widow that we all know that Jordan greatly covets her property. And we need to try and just make her a monthly visit, if possible.
So that we can get the property.
Yeah, exactly. No, just because, just think about it. She's out there all alone.
40 acres. Won't say she has to take care of that.
Yeah, okay, yeah. No, all right, so I'm glad you brought that up, so I actually have that in my notes. Picking up pine cones does not sound like exciting work to me. But if that is the kind of thing that she's needing to be visited on, and that's what that word visit means, it doesn't mean just stop in and say hello. What can I do for you? Picking up pine cones does not sound like fun. But if that's what she needs to have done, then okay, we'll go out and do that. Or maybe there's something, maybe there's something else that she needs to be done that is a little bit more exciting.
She has grizzlies and mountain lions.
Well, yeah.
You could go chase them.
Yeah, exactly. Go hunt a mountain lion. But it's just those little type of things. But even as we're thinking about that, that's not anything that's on a grand scale of, oh, this is so wonderful, it's going to get us recognition. No. But with her, probably mean the world. Then shall they say, or shall say they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or thirst, or stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, did not minister unto thee? Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not to one of these least of these, ye did it not to me. When we're thinking about the goats, contrasted to the sheep, they all had the same opportunity to do these things. And there's multiple reasons as to why they did not do it. Just not paying attention, just did not care, wasn't going to bring them recognition like with the Pharisees. Well, I'll help this big person, but I'm not going to help this little person. Or it could be like the one talent man, they're just lazy, slothful. And these shall go away, not sent away. These shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. We are the righteous. And there is nothing wrong with using that word. This is what we're supposed to be striving to be, is righteous. And how is it that these individuals and that we today can take on this terminology, take on this title? By behaving like Jesus would. That as I am saying about myself that I am a Christian, I'm also saying that I am a saint. Paul wrote to the saints at Corinth, by me saying that I am a Christian, I am saying that I am righteous. Oh, no, you're not supposed to have that kind of mentality, blah, blah, blah. If this is how God views me, then that's what I'm going to take. And it is sad with many brethren, how that many brethren are not learning these points about what it means to be righteous. We are here today doing this for us, for you. That it's not just a thing of that we're looking at, well, here's what I am doing. We're looking at the things of what am I neglecting. And we're trying to remove the mentality of, oh yeah, this is good for someone else. No, this is good information for everybody that's here. Because we have emotional problems here. We have home problems here. We have spiritual growth problems here. And we're not trying to just simply cover those things up. We're working at trying to remove them. The things that would hinder and the things that would harm, we are now administering instruction on how to make those things go away. And what's being taught to us here, it's not enough to just note the good in people. The good that is in people does not cancel out the bad that's also living there. The bad has to be removed. And the problem that we're facing a whole lot of the times is found for us in Revelation 3:17 with the Laodiceans, because thou sayest, I am rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing. Here's many people's problems today. Oh no, I'm good. I'm taken care of. Now this person over here, they need help. And then when someone comes along to point something out where they actually need help, this person is ready to tear into them. And we saw it with Sandpoint. Sandpoint had a major problem. But what was their mentality? Oh no, everything's fine. Everything's good. Don't worry about us. And not even realized. No, you guys are sick. You've got a sickness. And here's how you can remove it. Didn't even want to hear it. Didn't even want to look into it with the possibility that there's something wrong. Now, as we're saying that about Sandpoint, then what do we need to make sure that we don't do? That when somebody comes along wanting to possibly address something, that, hey, here's something you need to know about. Okay, let me hear it. Let me hear it. Let me see your evidence. And see if it's actually the case. And if it is, then all right. We'll need to change that. But if it's not, then you don't need to press us on it. And that it's even being said with this congregation, unless you change, unless you repent, I'm removing your candlestick. The whole entire group. Well, aren't there some good people at Laodicea? I'm sure there are. But if they're going to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, if Christ is going to remove their candlestick, they would need to get out. Okay, we're not sticking around for this. You're walking disorderly, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, we're withdrawing from you. The entire group. The key to this is James 1:19. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. But it's recognizing we have a need. So to finish this out, we just read about the people that will be in heaven. I want to be one of those people. I can be. I know how. Jesus has given us the example. He's given us the motivation behind all of it. But as we move into chapter 26 and we think about just how important this material is, and to think about when Jesus is teaching this, what's about to happen. Okay, you have the crucifixion. What happens before that?
His many trials.
Okay.
Betrayed.
Trials, betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. You're all right. Keep going.
Peter denies him.
Okay.
The Lord's Supper.
All right. Passover. And what is happening amongst the apostles?
They're still fighting.
Here Jesus is teaching, be thinking about everybody else. Don't be thinking about yourselves, be thinking about others. And Jesus is about to go through the most difficult time of his work. And here are the apostles, and they're arguing and fighting. But there's even something that goes on before that. And that's what we're going to use for our sermon in Matthew 26. So,
Boo.
any thoughts, questions, comments as we close 25?